Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's online Wiesner Gallery Tour. My name is Shannon Rose McAuliffe, and I am the manager of the Student Arts programs here at MIT. I'm joined by Sarah Herzl, who is the coordinator of the Wiesner Student Art Gallery, and Nancy Diane Valladares, who is an interdisciplinary artist from Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Nancy earned her BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and is a 2020 graduate of MIT's program in Arts, Culture, and Technology. Nancy's project this evening was supported by ACT, by a Fialco Fellowship through MIT's Transmedia Storytelling Initiative, by the Film Study Center at Harvard, and our very own Council for the Arts at MIT. After a brief introduction by Sarah about the exhibition, Nancy will lead us through the virtual show via her screen share. You're also welcome to view the exhibition on the webpage, which we are putting into the chat below. After the tour, please join us for some question and answer session with Nancy. You can feel free to submit your questions using the chat box. You can use the raise hand feature, or likewise, you could unmute or come on camera so that we can enjoy some really lively and engaging discussion together. Final order of business. Please note that this event is being recorded and may be made publicly available on the Wiesner Gallery website or elsewhere in the future. If you do not wish to appear in this recording, please take a moment to make sure that your video and audio are muted and turned off during the event. And if you have any questions about this, please contact Sarah Herzl at sherzl@mit.edu with any questions or concerns. So before we turn it over to Nancy, my dear colleague Sarah has a few words.
Thank you, Shannon Rose. Hi, I'm Sarah Herzl. I am really excited to see everyone here today. It's been a really great pleasure working with Nancy. I would like to extend my thanks also to Sophie Laloy, her graphic design collaborator, and a special thanks to Heidi Erickson, our graphic designer for MIT's Office of the Arts. It takes a collaboration such as these to animate the vision of artists like Nancy, and I'm very grateful for everyone's participation. Botanical Ghosts is a multi-part exploration of the history buried in the soil of Tela, Honduras. Nancy Valladares uses her website to transport us to a ghostly place where the earth itself holds dark secrets of colonialism and power. The plants in this place and the bodies buried under the soil call to us, and especially to Nancy, to tell their story. Nancy's vision makes poetry of the link between human domination and environmental ruin. Her deep quality of perception links the present to many layers of the past, the heart to the scientific mind, and human bodies to the biology of the earth that holds us. Nancy makes potent use of research-based artwork and illuminates the importance of emotion to tell stories, both historical and scientific. I'm very pleased to introduce Nancy Valladares.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction. And to everyone who is here and made this possible, my collaborators, I want to say thank you one more time, and to the Wiesner Gallery for all their support. Yeah, for the opportunity to once again gather, even though we're in a moment where that's not possible. But I'm really, really happy to see everyone and a lot of loved ones and colleagues here as well. Yeah, I feel, thank you, Shannon Rose, also for the introduction. I wanted to just talk really briefly about sort of the impetus behind this project. Sort of like a kind of more personal lens as to, like where a lot of these ideas kind of came from. So during my time as a student at MIT's program in Art, Culture, and Technology, I spent most of my time doing research in this particular site called Lancetia Botanical Gardens, what used to be a botanical experimental station that was founded in 1923 or 24 by United Fruit Company. I first stumbled upon the story of British botanist and archaeologist Dorothy Popeno in that site in 2017, I believe. And so I spent a lot of time kind of making these historical threads and connections, um, trying to like really understand what was like buried beneath that particular site. And I felt that that place functioned as a monument to the legacy of American interventionism in the region. And it was a nexus of several forces that shape Honduran political ecologies and biospheres for decades to come. And so Dorothy Popeno as a character, um, you really felt her presence in the gardens. You do still to these days. She haunts visitors with her almost biblical demise and the story of how she perished, which was eating a fruit of the ake, which is this, fruit that you see here in the background. It was very little was actually written about her work in the site, even though she did a lot of really great contributions. And she was a great scholar, archaeologist, and botanist in her own right, but it was sort of hidden behind the larger narrative and her husband, Wilson Popeno's career as a botanist. And I wanted to first, as an introduction, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I would like to share an excerpt of the film as to serve as an introduction.
I still do not know whose ghost you hope to become. In your letters to your sister, you write about all the things you did for love and out of love. I read them and reread them until the meaning of words dissolved and your handwriting became a cipher for recovering all the things we had forgotten. In my roundabout pursuit of you, I found myself haunted by your words, by the things that we never recorded or documented, but whose absence we clearly felt. I asked you once if you thought that soil contained memories. You answered, if it could remember, then we would eat all the lifetimes it had consumed. In your time at Kew Gardens, you often talked about freedom. Your inquisitive mind, your rebellious streak always got you into trouble. I remember because I often felt you left me out on purpose. Like the things we had shared moved to a quiet murmur in the background, and only the object of your current obsession could ever draw your attention at any given time. What things should be unearthed? What should be allowed to rest beneath the ground? What do we preserve? If the soil remembers, why do we need to dig, taxonomize, and catalog?
I'm going to pause the video there. You can watch the rest of the short in the site. It's available there. And I'm just going to sort of give you guys a little bit more of a background into some of this material, and then go through a walkthrough of the site so we can kind of experience it together. Um, so when I returned to Popeno House for the second time in 2018, I sat near Popeno House and watched a group of bees perform a beautiful dance around yellow hibiscus. Dilapidated and in disrepair, the wooden building murmured all the things rendered banal by history. I felt the same weight that often accompanies monuments to violence settle like a blanket on my shoulders. Not too far from Popeno House, surrounded by a fence and dotted with several danger signs, Lancettia houses two specimens of Bliasapida, also known as the Aki tree, which produces a pear-like fruit that, if is eaten before it ripens or is improperly cooked, induces a severe hypoglycemia, or known as Jamaican vomiting sickness. And from what we know and read in several books and biographical notes, Dorothy Popeno died in December 1932 after eating properly cooked ackee. I spent quite some time weaving Dorothy's life and her work with the transatlantic voyage of the ackee, whose migration reveals the ongoing extraction of human labor and resources at the service of empire. This fruit crossed through the Middle Passage from West Africa and made its way to several islands in the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica, where it became a staple food in the cooking of the region. And eventually made its way to Lancettia as part of experiments in propagation of tropical species for United Fruit Company. And as I was doing my research, going through several different archives and sources, it was clear to me that a narrative was forming from all these missing pieces and their deliberate silences and political occlusions. And I was drawing from collections at Harvard Peabody Museum, Hunt Institute for Botanical Documentation at Carnegie Mellon University, at the Royal Kew Gardens, among others, where I sought to create a new speculative archive called A Dedicated Mechanism of Forgetting, which contains a collection of letters, documents, and images that were compiled over the period of 2 years that I was working on Botanical Ghosts. So now I'm going to sort of go ahead and give a very brief tour of the website experience, so that you all can go after the talk and experience it on your own. And once again, I wanted to thank my collaborator and dear friend Sophie Laloy, who worked for a long time, and to make this happen. I would not have been able to do this without her. And so the way that the website is structured is sort of like a book. Several chapters, like kind of comprise this particular web iteration of the project. So you're able to sort of experience the film and then also enter the archive, where a lot of the documents and images are kind of housed. And the archive is now is still living and it's ongoing, and more and more things are being added. So please check back often to see what's new. So I could kind of show you what that looks like. And the archive is interactive, which means that things can be kind of reconfigured and rearranged, and they can be coded in different ways, and different relationships that kind of emerge from them. And these are kind of sourced from some of the artifacts, for example, that Dorothy Popeno unearthed while she was doing work at Lancettia. Some of these are film stills. Some of these are some sort of fictional letter exchanges, letters that I wrote to Dorothy, as well as some of the photographs that she took while she was at Lancettia. And it's for now, the archive is still growing, but I'm looking forward very much to putting, more of the material that's on there. And so please, go ahead and play with it and experience it. It's meant to be experienced more as a photo album or um, a little bit more intimately than traditional sort of like archival like form. Um, and so yeah, I'm gonna kind of go back. The rest of the website is sort of comprised of a series of writings and fictions, the kind of tell of, about like sort of like Dorothy's experience at Lancetia. And I wanted to sort of read a brief excerpt from one of the pieces of writing. I was buried near the palmariums. The valley of Lancetia had been cultivated and engineered for hundreds of years before we arrived, before the people who lived here had even settled it. Let me tell you about the worlds within worlds that came from Lancetia. This has always been a place of death, where bodies were fed to the soil and then proceed to becoming and transforming. In order to ensure the formation of the acres upon plantations in the coast of Honduras, we chose to accept the death of many things. In the soggy marsh of the plantation, everything makes love. Everything consumes everything. Then it returns and releases. To summon the specters that are buried in the marshlands and the jungle requires an act of necromancy and magic. A specter is that which leaves behind an imprint whose frequency cannot be sensed with tools for quantification. Rather, it requires a sensibility to speak to the inanimate and the dead, and the living things that are considered dead but aren't, and the persons whose animacy has been obscured and undermined by structures of power and dispossession. To accommodate for the world we were about to build, we burned a billion graves, leveled, razed to the ground, cemeteries within cemeteries of microbial subjectivities and vegetal life, ecological networks that must now parlay an imbalance in the systems that have been disrupted. The things that once slept now have awakened. Whose life do we choose to mourn, and whose deaths do we then memorialize? And so you can sort of experience this as a sort of web version of the text. You can kind of go through, and it's not in any particular chronological order, but it's rather more of a collaging of narratives and temporalities. And finally, as part of these sort of fictional exchanges that I had with Dorothy, I spent some time writing letters to her over a period of 2 years, and I felt that I sort of like had an experience with her that was across time, and I wanted to read to you one of the letters that I wrote to her during my time doing research. I'm gonna read it out loud now. Dear Dorothy, it's strange to be writing to you right now in 2020 to express wonder at the various interests and desires we share, despite being cultivated under different worlds. I recently visited Peabody Museum, which houses the collection of your photographs and artifacts that you excavated from Lancetia. As I finished my time as a student here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I think of the places you frequented here and the institutions that across time marked both of our lives. What is the likelihood that I would find you here as well? I wanted to share with you a bit of my family history and my motivations behind writing to a ghost. As a child, mornings in my house were marked by rituals of death, although no one ever explicitly told me they were so. The cracking open of windows, the rituals around the cutting of hair, the portents of the animals, and the blooming of rare flowers that were marked with a pencil on a kitchen calendar. When it rained, we remembered. A smell of petrichor served as both balm and a wound, a reminder of the circumstances which brought us to other shores and other seas. It's hard sometimes to imagine ourselves as young as we were living in that house, the one that is no longer home. We still remember the cliffs and the hideouts, memories of a childhood's worth of mapping the proximate and the familiar, tiny taxonomies of rocks, shells, and leaves. Here is a favorite tree. These are the best branches to pick mangoes, and that is the best time to hear the song of the luminous bird. We learned from our grandmothers to read the paths of the insects and the white moths that aren't moths on the guava tree. We knew that April rain brings a blanket of insects that crawl inside our ear, and the migrant ants whose yearly visits invited the winds. The moth, my grandmother's favorite prophet, would often visit with the same missive to announce the coming of an ending. Our family, cursed with the gift of long lifespans, was deeply intimate with a kind of mourning that has nothing to do with burials. Only now do I realize how so many of our daily rituals were colored by the remnants of the non living. It's here at the crossing of these thresholds that the world of the dead folds into my own. And so you see, dear Dorothy, at certain times of day we're not so far from each other. Sometimes as if you're I feel as if you're sitting next I feel as if you're sitting next to me. Until next time. And this concludes sort of my little brief tour of the website and the web experience of this project. And I think, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I don't know, Sarah, what's next, but
Oh, I will chime back in. Thank you so much. That was
thank you, Shannon.
fantastic and really compelling. And I'm sure I have questions. I hope other people do. So at this point, I would love to invite people either to put questions in the chat, raise your hand, or if you'd like to unmute, come on audio or video, we'd also welcome your conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, anyone who wants to come on video, we welcome you, just to help celebrate Nancy and her exhibition.
Well, I've got a question then. If other people are still sort of um, letting all of this marinate in their brains, there's a lot to take in because it was so impressive. So, what I would love to know a little bit more, what's your personal history with the Lancetia Research Station? Like, did you find it and then were you inspired to tell the story? Or were you first looking to tell the story and then you discovered the station and discovered Dorothy Popeno? Do you have a history in Tela? Sort of tell us some more of this backstory.
I actually kind of stumbled upon it. This is sort of Lancetia is a place, or it's become a park where you can kind of go visit, and sort of it's a place where you kind of like go to in the North Coast. I honestly didn't know much about it until I went there once with a cousin of mine, and I was very, very uh, just compelled by a lot of things in that site. That was very, very left an impression in me. And the more research that I did, the deeper kind of like you go into the story, I realized actually um, there was like a lot of connections to our history that I didn't really realize until much later. For example, my grandpa, like he worked on, he was a laborer who worked on the railroads that were used to kind of transport um, fruit and materials in the North Coast. And it's a very common history actually in Honduras, family kind of history in Honduras, where you probably had some family member who worked either in plantations or in sort of like in some kind of agriculture. And I think that was sort of a part of also the imaginary, I think, of Honduran cultural identity, it which you know it's a sort of like a fact of strange kind of shame but simultaneous pride that Honduras was called the first banana republic, in this sort of pejorative term that was used to describe countries in Central America and Latin America whose soils and territories were used for essentially a kind of extractive agricultural paradigm. And so it's both personal but also like a very um, not uncommon sort of common experience, I think, in Honduras and other places in Central America as well.
That's excellent. Really good answer. That leads me to some other questions. I see that we've got a question from Joshi.
Cool, thanks. Hi, Nancy. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I had a question about Dorothy's politics as the wife of somebody employed by the United Fruit Company. To what extent was there any criticality about kind of their position and his being there, or was it more just focused on her work? I'm curious about how maybe was there any tension between them, or perhaps even between him and sort of his role in public, or as an official role, or a private difference there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple. I think there's a kind of couple of things in there that I'll try to answer. So in terms of Dorothy's politics, I think I can only kind of like speculate at this point. Although I did spend some time with her sort of letters and her writing, and I do believe that there was some tension, of course, between her sort of attempt at being a botanist, an archaeologist, a scholar in her own right, particularly at that time, and sort of like making and paving her way, despite the fact that she was often in the shadow of Wilson, Wilson Popeno's kind of big name. I think that my relationship to her is a very complicated one. I really deeply believe that she was complicit in all of these kind of structures. She very much performed the labor of, I think, empire, of capitalism, of these kind of colonial desires to collect, to preserve, and then to museum, of like historicizing things perhaps that don't necessarily need to be historicized, or perhaps they do, I don't know. So I think it was complicated because she also had a way of thinking about life, and about the creatures, the plants, the vegetal world that she was encountering in that place. I think that she was also I think that she was thinking about animacy in at a time where it was like very precocious thinking, I think. But I cannot, of course, project these more contemporary notions of what that means, particularly under the post-humanities. And so I think it's complicated. I think in many ways it's excavating those questions and those silences where fiction kind of comes in. And so I think the Dorothy Popeno that I'm kind of dealing with here is a fiction. She is very much a character that I've appropriated in a way. And so I feel my job as an artist, I think it was here to, to kind of harness that in a way that was productive, maybe, or I hope was productive. But yeah, answer the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Looks like we've also got a couple of really lovely questions in the chat. So in case some can't see, I will read the first one from Samuel. Artists are often driven by intuition and motives that can be difficult to verbalize. You talked about the impression that the park had on you. Can you talk more about that? What was the attraction before you had done all of this research and processing? And what do you think you were seeking through this undertaking and this process?
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for that question. I don't know if I think intuition is a good word. I think this is that particular site was a place that I felt contained already. You just walk in there and you just know that there's things that are haunting that place. It just feels like it's a place that has a lot of stories to tell. Um, I think I had a kind of emotional experience there as well, because the north coast of Honduras has become, I don't know, and I can't give you exactly percentages or numbers right now off the top of my head, but has the ecologies and the biome of that area has been largely turned into one big plantation, you know, like a palm plantation, sort of monocultural landscape. And Lancetia sort of is this oasis that um, has incredible, you know, biodiversity that's both engineered but native. So it's sort of like a little protected area that still contains the specters of like what the ecosystem was before, and then how it was transformed through the introduction of all these new plant species into the region. And I think that that to me was sort of like maybe the thing that the first magnet, and then it just kind of became a little wormhole that I couldn't escape for like 2 years. I'm still trying to escape it. um, but I think that in terms of what I was seeking through undertaking the process, I think I was looking for a story as well, and I kind of stumbled upon it, and I found it, and I've kind of, it's been in my mind for a long time, and so yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you just kind of stumble upon those things.
These things can be inexplicable in the best possible way. So Christiana says, there's gratitude for the beautiful presentation and the website, and an appreciation for the notes you have. Whose life do we choose to mourn? Whose deaths do we then memorialize? And the question is, why is the format of the archive important to you, or important to this project specifically? It seems as though the legacy of the archive privileges certain items that are deemed valuable with the significant absence of others. And your project is very articulate in the specter from this place of absence. So, do you wish to take a position in relation to the archive regarding reclaiming it, criticizing it, etc.?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. I definitely, I mean, my hope, my aspiration is to, yes, to kind of look at the archive as the kind of form that definitely needs to be, or an attempt at being sort of, you know, critically fabulating it, you know, to use the term. Um, uh, yeah, sorry, I'm like getting tongue tied here. Um, I mean, I think archives are, you know, these, you know, forms that kind of like sort of seek to like, you know, frame or to present a certain version of a dominant narrative. And I think that for me, I was I was very much interested in these kind of like empty spaces, sort of that you pointed out, as gaps that can be filled in through fiction and speculation. And I think that that is an act of reclamation for me. I think I'm still trying to work through that. I don't know that necessarily it's that is fully fleshed out or resolved, but my hope is that in this space, and by further engaging with it, I can reach that. Um, but yeah, I definitely feel, you know, the archive has been formulated and reformulated in so many ways. I think in, you know, art practices. I was actually talking about this with Sarah the other day. You know, I was thinking about also the relationship to the family album, you know, sort of like the more personal, um, you know, and intimate archives that we all sort of built as ways of experiencing and memorializing the world. Also as a kind of counter narrative to this more institutional and almost hegemonic form of telling history. And so Dorothy's personal album, a lot of those images, that are kind of part in the film are drawing from her personal, sort of like more intimate moments, between her family, herself, portraits of her loved ones. And I thought that those kind of served as a weight that the things in the archive, uh, in other archives, did not contain. And that collusion between her more academic, and more sort of like historically, heavy work. I think those two things were doing something more for me. Yeah.
So we've got another one that definitely resonates with me. Can you talk a little bit more about the ackee fruit, its role in your relationship with Dorothy, and its history in the botanical project of imperial expansion?
Thank you, Ray. So that is like quite a network that like needs to be traced, but I'm gonna do my best to do that. So the ackee fruit became also like a really interesting character, for me, that took on a life of its own. I think that definitely it's part of the challenge, I think, of this story, and about like, these characters, particularly non-human characters, is how do you kind of try to look at history from the perspective of a fruit that is very much an anthropocentric and probably anthropomorphic desire. But Ray, who's the question, Ray, who's the person who asked the question, my colleague, you yourself talk about the role, I guess, of like empathy, or how can these, kind of anthropomorphic desires, could they become like maybe tools through which we can shift, this anthropocentrism. So for me, that was a question. I don't know if the form itself was doing that, but as an exercise in thinking was really, really useful. In terms of my relationship with Dorothy and the fruit, and this kind of like triangulation that was happening throughout history, the fruit itself was this sort of like more deeper history. It was like going much further back in time. All the way back to its, roots in West Africa, and the fact that it'd been, a staple food for a really, really long time, much longer before the colonial project even started. And I think I really like this sort of like, triangulation, this kind of historical encounter, maybe as a vector through which a story can be told, and through which history can be challenged and reconfigured. And I think the networks of botanical exchange that were part of the colonial project can tell us a lot about the histories that are being hidden now to this day, particularly like histories of agriculture as they relate to resource extraction, through the exploitation of Black folks in Latin America and all over the Caribbean and the United States, because plantation histories, that like were sort of flourishing at the time of slavery, also made their way, through specific vectors from the Caribbean, and all throughout Latin America. And so the technologies of agriculture that we have now have their roots as well in plantation, these sort of plantation ecologies. And that to me is a really crucial lens that we had been missing for a really long time, particularly in Honduran history. And so it's kind of locus and reconfiguration, I think, it's I think for me provided an elasticity that other more dominant perspectives of history did not have.
So then I sort of have a twofer for you. So give me a second because we have two quite interrelated questions from Semina and Marissa. So, firstly, you talk about your complicated relationship with Dorothy. She is a dear colleague, but she's also an agent of colonialism. Can you say more about your experience of getting to know your home through this character? And relatedly, the similar question and thought from Marissa is in thinking about imperial expansion, it's interesting how you, Nancy, described your project as appropriating Dorothy. You're very deliberate with your diction. So, can you elaborate on both of these questions together?
Yeah. Oh, these are spicy questions. I'm gonna try to answer that. Yeah, I think so Samita is actually my roommate. She's in the other room asking the spicy questions. Thank you so much. I yeah, no, I think this complicated relationship with Dorothy is also, I think, maybe a mirror of my complicated relationship also to home, to to Honduras. It's I think it was also like a very personal and deeply like maybe solipsistic also exercise, because I was also working through identity, being part of a kind of diaspora of Central American immigrants in the United States. um, and I think that those complicated relationships and positions uh, and politics also manifest themselves in me as well. I think that that is also a recognition that that complexity, I think, of being also happens to to this day, to me, to other folks who might be members of diaspora. um, and so maybe I don't know if it's possible for me to appropriate Dorothy. I don't know if that is the term that I would use, but um, yeah, I mean, I feel that stories from the Northern Triangle, particularly Honduras, it's really hard to find them. I think that there's a lot of them, but I feel that they are not given as much leverage or as much weight, as they should. In some ways, I think that the history of the region has been deeply submerged because of American interventionism in the region, and it continues to be so, even though we have an ongoing exodus of, at this very moment, of climate refugees that are fleeing the region, due to ecological collapse, through corruption, through, a lot of different reasons. But and I'm not saying that I'm not trying to make like a claim that this is reason, but I'm certain that these things can kind of be connected to that. So
Hi, congratulations, Nancy.
thank you so much, Rosette.
I have a little question that has to do with the archival impulse in your work as well, building on someone else's question earlier. And the way your platform sort of generates archives out of archives. I was wondering if you could expand on how you conceived the online platform as a space of cultural speculation, because the way I see it, or the way I read it, and I've been sort of playing around with the website since earlier, and it's beautiful. I sort of see it as a way to reconcile the colonial historical weight of your research with and sort of the semantic reading of the archive with the properly situated historical present. So yeah, I was just sort of wondering if you sort of see yourself as, you know, I've been reading lots of Hal Foster today. So I was thinking of the artist as archivist versus the artist as ethnographer. And if you sort of see yourself in this line of thought, and if it's a way for you to reclaim these difficult histories. Sorry, my question is a little, you know.
No, it's great. Thank you so much. That is a good question. So, you know, in some ways, like what I think I like about this position is that as an artist, you can kind of embody different roles, and you're not necessarily beholden, I think, to the forms or the, I think, traditions of, you know, these other disciplines, which is you know, problematic, but it's also in some ways an impulse that I think a lot of artists kind of choose to follow. I think that flexibility and that kind of nebulous gray area between disciplines is one that I really, that for me was like very empowering. I've been someone who's been interested in history, but I'm not a historian. And I may follow kind of some, you know, methodologies of research, but I'm not necessarily, you know, like producing academic work. You know, first and foremost, like an artist and filmmaker. And so yeah, I don't know, it's a gray area. I don't know. So question mark.
It just makes me think of two words that keep coming to mind that you've already mentioned in this Q&A, which is stretch and reconfigure. And I feel like I love the fact that the archive itself is stretchable and reconfigurable, because it's like you're literally parting apart, you know, the formerly known like academic facts.
Yes.
Putting in like your letter, your photo, your encounter, your feeling, and like fleshing it out. But that stretch and reconfigure, I just think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I'm actually, maybe I'm going to use this as a plug for the upcoming panel with my colleague Samina and Shireen Hamza. I don't know if Shireen's here, but we're actually going to be talking precisely about this, sort of like about the experiences of artists and historians in the archives. And so we're going to be having like that discussion sometime in March, because that, I feel that like one of the things that we were kind of discussing together before, like, you know, the talk kind of even happened, was that there are moments of affect that happen while you're, you know, looking through all of this material that as academics you might not be able to express or even speculate on, because automatically that disqualifies or undermines the work that you're trying to do as an academic. So the question is then, what happens, you know, to the things that do like kind of produce, you know, affect? What does it mean, you know, when you go into an archive and you kind of break down when you have an emotional experience at, you know, being there and witnessing, seeing the material spoils, I think, of kind of colonial, that colonial impulse for collection, for organizing and classifying. And so I think that is where a lot of the friction is happening. And yeah, you know, in conversation with my colleagues, I realized it's not something that just happens to the artist. It's something that, it's simply, there's no space for that in academia. Or maybe there should be, perhaps maybe there should be like a dedicated way of addressing, you know, you know, these other things and making space for them.
Well, oh, sorry, I don't want to talk over you. This
Mhm.
is a really excellent transition, plugging your upcoming event. So basically, I think we're going to start to wrap because we'll have the opportunity for all of these questions to continue as the dialogue continues, as more thoughts and questions come up. So I think we're going to start to transition toward closing. At this point, I want to thank everybody who's here for attending this evening. Thank you to my co-host, Sarah. And of course, thank you to Nancy. Thank you to Sophie for this fabulous showing of Botanical Ghosts. We'd like to encourage everybody to watch the entire 8 minutes of the film and to explore the exhibition at your leisure. And as we were just discussing, we want to invite everybody back on Tuesday, March 16th at 6 p.m. for ongoing, very stimulating and sort of mind-blowing conversation between Nancy and two of her scholars and colleagues who also work at the intersection of art, biology, and the history of science. We'll have Samina, we'll have Shireen, and basically you can register for this event. The event is titled The Loss of Green, Imagining Vegetal Worlds. And you can sign up for this through the Wiesner Gallery website, which is going to be linked in the chat right now. So also the Wiesner Gallery website has information on other upcoming events in the gallery, including exhibition opportunities for anybody who might be interested in that. So with that, I think we're going to round off. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you so much.
Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Shannon Rose.
Beautiful to see your work.
Thank you.